in Ballarat in 1941 and ordained in 1966, George Pell was appointed Archbishop of Melbourne in 1996.
He had an enormous capacity for work and for perseverance. He had no self-doubt.
He was a big, tough sort of character, and he was heading for something.
Pell spearheaded the Melbourne response, a controversial redress scheme heavily criticised for offering capped compensation payments and for re-traumatising sexual abuse survivors.
They found a church that was aggressive and defensive. They found a church that was trying to get into risk management.
But his hardline conservatism and financial acumen won him plenty of admirers in Rome. He became a cardinal in 2003 and then Vatican treasurer in 2014, considered the third most powerful position in the church.
He was very close to the Pope. Pope Francis picked him to oversee this reform of the Vatican finances.
It was from Rome that he gave evidence to the Royal Commission into institutional responses to child sexual abuse. Pell fiercely denied accusations. He turned a blind eye to allegations of abuse and protected paedophile priests.
They handed down that judgment that he did know what was going on.
He became a sort of symbol of the secrecy and the cover-up of the church generally.
Then in 2017, a bombshell. Pell himself charged with historic sex abuse.
Your conduct was permeated by staggering arrogance. I sentence you to a total effective sentence of 6 years imprisonment.
Pell's conviction was initially upheld on appeal. He spent a year in jail before it was finally overturned by the High Court in 2020. Today, there were both tributes and laments for a towering figure with a fiercely contested legacy.
He has been a forthright defender of the faith, a great gospel man.
You can never get justice for what happened to us kids back in the days. Our journey through life and suffering will never end, so that's just one chapter. The Pell chapter's now probably closed.
He was one of the most significant figures to come from this country. He placed Australia at the centre of Catholic affairs for over 20 years.
To be honest, most survivors will not shed any tears for George Pell's passing.
For many people, particularly of the Catholic faith, this will be a difficult day.
Colm Flynn is the Vatican correspondent for the Christian news agency EWTN. He interviewed Cardinal Pell just days ago, as it happens, and joins us now. Colm, you spoke to him just before he passed. Was this a shock to you?
Yeah, it was a shock because, as you mentioned, I'm speaking to you from Florida at the moment, but when I flew from Rome, where I'm based, the last person that I met and interviewed before I got on that plane was Cardinal George Pell. I went to his apartment, his papal apartment, which is just right next door to St. Peter's Square in the heart of Rome. And I went there to interview him about the passing of Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI and to get his memories of the Pope, the late Pope. He was in remarkably good form. He was asking us about the holidays, about the plans for the new year. And I just was surprised that he was actually in a very good humor. And so when I heard the news today, I thought it was actually a rumor. Straight away, I called his private secretary, Father Joseph Hamilton. And when he picked up, before I said anything, he said, "It's true, Cardinal Pell is dead."
Colm, it's hard to think of a more polarising figure in Australia, both broadly and within the church. So what's the reaction been across the Catholic world?
He was, just as he is in Australia, a very divisive figure, and his legacy will be just that. You have on one hand those who found him to be too much of what they would have said a hardliner, anti-this, anti-that. And then, of course, the record on sexual abuse, the famous court case and High Court judgment aside, many think when he was bishop in Australia that he, like many other bishops around the world and church leaders, he didn't do enough to reprimand people who were guilty of sexual abuse. And they would accuse him of being part of the cover-up, something he has strongly always denied. On the other hand, you have the Catholics who say that he wasn't anti-this or anti-that. He was merely doing what he should have been doing as a high church official, and that was reinforcing and teaching the doctrine of the Catholic Church, the teachings that have been there for not hundreds, but thousands of years.
Well, even as he passed, he was defending a civil case relating to those historic abuse allegations. I don't expect you to speak to that, but I guess that does sum up how complicated his legacy is.
Yes, I interviewed him maybe 5 or 6 times for EWTN, the Catholic network, and then also for the BBC. We talked mainly about his time in prison, about what he thought his legacy was going to be, but he always did maintain his innocence. He did say in one interview for the BBC, when I asked him, but do you have any regrets about the way you handle cases when you were bishop? And he said, well, you know, looking back, things could always have been done differently. And then I asked him, was enough done? And he said, we could have done more. We could always have done more.
Did he express any regret that that issue will always be sort of irrevocably attached to his legacy, that whatever, you know, his guilt or innocence in any of those issues, that he can't escape it, really, as a matter of, you know, what his legacy becomes?
He was very philosophical about it. And this is where his faith came in. He had very strong faith, whether you agreed with him or not. And he said to me, Colm, I believe, as Catholics are meant to believe, that it will not be easy on this earth. And he referenced Jesus. He said, look at Jesus. He was nailed to a cross and he bled to death. He said, I will get my final judgment. And that's what really kept him going throughout prison as well. He felt, he said, in his words, I always knew I was innocent. I'm innocent. And I will get my final judgment. Truth will come out in the end. Speaking for him when he gets to those pearly gates. And today is the day that he passed away.
Final judgment seems such a poignant phrase in this context too, Colm. For everybody, I think, who's looking at this story. It's been great to get your insights as someone who spoke to him so recently and has followed him for so long. Thank you very much for your time.
Anytime. Thank you so much, guys.